UCB Life Issues with Paul Hammond.
And as always, a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Isn't it amazing how many Christmas things get lodged in our brains? Because you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Exactly. And so many of these different images get fixed, and the truth is not a lot of them are always or necessarily accurate. As Kurt Russell says in Christmas Chronicles 1, why does Santa always have to be fat? And yet it's the image that comes across. And whether it's Santa, whether it's Dickens, whether it's Mary and Joseph in a pretty stable with shepherds and wise men and angels, how much does this cultural fake news get in the way of finding a saviour who is Christ the Lord? This week on Life Issues, we're asking, is it going to be the tree or the cross at the heart of this year's Christmas? And is that even a fair question? As we climb aboard the sleigh, open up the pretty paper and see if there really is any gold, frankincense and myrrh in the baby's stable. Joining me in this winter wonderland is someone whose name is always on the nice list. Cultural commentator, author, lecturer and regular on UCB1. It's Tony Watkins. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's nice to be here.
Truth is, though, I mean, this whole Christmas thing, the imagery that we carry with us, it is ubiquitous, isn't it? The culture of Christmas does get inside your head and does shape, even as people of faith, shapes our perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of the Santa stuff that is just part and parcel of Christmas. Santa only became red because of a Coca-Cola advertising campaign. Previously he was green, and yet we wouldn't think of having a non-red Santa around the place. But I mean, it's easy to just dismiss those kinds of things because as Christians, because we know that they're just part of all of this elaboration of Christmas, the stuff we've added in that has nothing to do with the core Christmas story. But what we don't realize is how much we've done that to the Christmas narratives that themselves. The nativity story has been so kind of, what's the word, sanitized by Western culture, and yeah, we see it through the eyes of school nativity plays very often, I think.
And I came across, I saw in your notes about, as we were preparing for today, and the idea that actually that phrase, which has become the phrase of the last 4 years, fake news, the truth is you could apply that even to the Christian version of Christmas. I mean, talk us through some of these narratives that you think perhaps are missing the point.
Well, where do we start? So Mary and Joseph, Mary rides on a donkey from Bethlehem to, from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Well,
singing little donkey, all the way.
Yeah. Where is the donkey mentioned? There is no donkey mentioned in the birth narratives. Not one. I mean, it's okay. Maybe it's a reasonable inference that Mary, being pregnant, rode on a donkey because it would be quite a way to walk.
She couldn't get an Uber.
Well, that's true, but she might have walked because they might not have had a donkey. We just don't know. They might have been somebody in the village who was prepared to take them down to Nazareth with their ox cart. Or you know, actually we don't even know that Joseph and Mary traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem, because there is a very strong argument that Bethlehem actually was Joseph's hometown, and that they settled in Nazareth subsequently. No, that's slightly argued, but you see, we assume it. They arrive in Bethlehem, and then what happens in Bethlehem? They have to go from inn to inn, trying to find somewhere that has a spare room for them to be able to rent because Mary's about to have the baby. She's about to have it now. I mean, I don't think they would have left it until the last minute to travel anyway. But if Joseph is of the house and line of David, So Bethlehem is his ancestral home, and particularly, I mean, this is even more the case if he has grown up there, if it is his hometown. But he could go to anybody in Bethlehem and say, I'm Joseph. This is my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather. They say, oh, you're one of David's descendants. You are welcome, because the Middle East has this extraordinary culture of hospitality today and then. And these were Joseph's people. This was Joseph's clan. This was Joseph's ancestral home. He would be welcome with anybody in that town, and Mary too, even if Mary wasn't related to them.
Yeah, and especially you might say if they turn up and Mary is pregnant and the baby is due anytime. I mean, decent humanity is going to open a door to that, isn't it? So where do these perspectives around this story, where do they come from?
Well, a number of places. Oh, and there's the stable business as well, because there's no inns. They have to go to a stable because it's the last place in Bethlehem. Mustn't forget to mention that. So there's a number of things going on here. One is this idea that because Jesus is laid in a manger, okay, animal feeding trough. So Western people say, oh, that's in a stable then, because the idea of having an animal feeding trough in your home just doesn't, it's not on our radar, because we don't understand how Middle Eastern peasants lived and in many cases still do live today. So we have already, that gives us a stable kind of idea. And then we've got the idea coming from originally, apparently, Francis of Assisi, that the ox and the donkey were looking over at Jesus just as he was born, because of the phrase in Isaiah, the ox knows its master and the ass its owner. I think Isaiah, early chapters of Isaiah, I can't think where off the top of my head, sorry. And so Francis of Assisi saw that as messianic, and Jesus is laid in a manger, therefore Jesus is in the stable. So the ox and the ass are there as witnesses to the coming of the Messiah. So he did the first nativity reenactment in a cave with his disciples for people to be able to see and kind of sense what was happening. So Francis of Assisi has something to some responsibility for all of this. And then there's the translation issue. So from the King James Bible onwards, maybe earlier, but certainly from the King James, the word for the place where there was no room was translated as inn. And yet it's not a word for an inn. Luke uses a different word for an inn when he has the Good Samaritan story. It's a more general story. That's a place, a single room place, a dormitory really, where you could go and stay as a traveller. And the word he uses is the same word as for the upper room. So it's a guest room in a house. So sometimes it was an upper room, sometimes it was a back room. So in a Middle Eastern peasant's house, the family lived in one room. So hence when Jesus talks about lighting a lamp so that it gives light to everyone in the house, because everybody lives in the one room. But at the entrance, there's an area for the animals, which is not divided from, I mean, it may be a difference of level. Sometimes it was a little underground, that you might have a cave sort of area underneath for the animals. But often there was just a bit of a dividing wall with the manger as a sunken bit in the floor filled with straw for the animals to eat from. And then first thing every morning, you'd take the animals outside. So the animals would give you warmth at night during the winter and so on. So Jesus talks about, he has this discussion about Sabbath with the Pharisees, and he says, which of you doesn't lead the animals out in the morning? Yeah, everybody does that because the animals are there. And then, so at one end of the house or upstairs, there would be a guest room. So what Luke says is there's no room for them in the guest room because there are other family members there for the census. Or it can also be translated. There was a very interesting study done in an academic paper a few years ago. And this person was arguing that the translation is not, there wasn't a guest room for them, but there was no room for them in the guest room, or there was no room for Jesus. It was just too small, too many people there. So they were in the guest room, but Mary perhaps had to leave to give birth, to go out into the main part of the house or whatever. And then they put Jesus in the one out of the way place that was left, which was the manger. So all of that makes perfect sense. And then, of course, once Jesus has been born, knock at the door, shepherds. Well, I mean, certainly the shepherds came straight away because the angel said tonight in the town of David. Yes, but they are not followed close on the heels by the wise men, because the wise men come to the house to see the child, probably sometime later, could be a year or two later, given the age of the children that Herod exterminates. How many wise men? We don't know. There are 3 gifts, but we don't know there are 3 wise men. The wise men are not kings. There's just so many bits we've added onto the story. We make assumptions because we've told the story over and over and over and over and over in the same way, year after year, and we don't see the reality.
But does it really matter, Tony? I mean,
yes.
It gets the message across, doesn't it? It gets the point across. And all right, the wise men rocked up later, but we need to get them into the tableau in the carol service, because otherwise you can't wait a year before you bring the wise men in, because it'll be Christmas all over again. I mean, we need to do it. We need to artistic license, Tony, surely.
Well, I can go along with that to an extent. And it would be possible, I suppose, to say age nativity story. These are last year's wise men just turning up with this year's shepherds. Yeah, and does it matter? Yeah, I think it does matter for a number of reasons. One is we follow the Lord Jesus Christ, who says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Christians should be concerned about truth more than anyone else. So we shouldn't be content with telling half-baked, misconstrued stories that actually don't reflect what the Bible narratives themselves actually say. We shouldn't be content with adding to it or twisting it or taking away from it or just misreading it. We should have higher standards than that. So that's one reason. Second reason is that some of these kinds of things, because they are a little bit flaky historically, they easily end up in people's minds in the same category as some of the legendary elements of Christmas. Those people who want to put Jesus in the same category as Father Christmas, if they start realizing that some of the things that we say about the birth narratives themselves are not strictly true, that can help them to call into question the whole thing.
Pretty much as the story of, undoubtedly there was a historic Saint Nicholas. There was a historic person who endeavoured to do good. Santa as an imagery has grown up around it. But nobody really takes Santa seriously. And St. Nicholas is kind of assigned into that same sort of category. That's the sort of concern that you have here.
Yeah, it is. And then the third one, I think, is the most problematic, which is that if we keep telling these stories wrongly, then it makes us interpret the biblical text wrongly. So it's important for us to say, oh, the wise men turned up in Jerusalem expecting to find Jesus in the palace, but he wasn't there because Jesus wasn't born in a palace. Because although he gave up all the glory of heaven to be born as an ordinary human being. Yes, absolutely right. But then we go too far. Ian Paul makes this point in an article he wrote on his website a few years ago about some of these things, where he is very influenced by a book that changed my thinking on this altogether, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes by Ken Bailey. But it's just a fantastic, eye-opening book. But Ian Paul makes the point that by seeing Jesus being born in a stable, he's actually excluded from the mainstream. He's pushed down an alley now he's one of the most needy of all people. And yes, of course, Jesus identifies with the neediest, but he's no longer part of ordinary life. In the same way, he's not part of ordinary life if he was born in a palace. Now he's not part of ordinary life because he's pushed out of human society into the place where the animals are. And so it makes it remote. It disconnects it from us. Jesus came to a real family situation. Yeah, maybe not a nuclear family situation like ours, a very extended family situation with an awful lot of people under one roof for these days, weeks, months, possibly. We just don't know enough at that level. But here is a crowded family community situation, and Jesus is the Son of God, is born as a baby into the heart of the community, not into an outhouse and not into a palace, but into the heart of the community of people. And then more community people come, the people from the wider community, the shepherds come to welcome him. And yes, at some point, the Gentiles come to welcome him too, as the wise men coming from the east with their gifts, their symbolic gifts. And so there's an awful lot going on, but he's born into the middle of ordinary human life.
And that is an important point. And as we are thinking this week about the stories around Christmas, as we often do, and the realities or the focus of our Christmas and the way in which the ubiquitous messages and images of Christmas, whether they be Christian or whether they be other, around this whole time get into our heads, it's important that we clarify and we have an understanding, because one of the dangers with all of this, Tony, is that it shifts our focus, doesn't it? And I suppose we have two choices at Christmas. Our focus is about us as people, or our focus is about Jesus. Let's think about that for a little while as we think about whether it's the cross or whether it's the tree that we will focus on this year. We can make Christmas very self-focused even when we're being very generous, can't we?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we can think of it being self-focused in two ways, I think. One, individually self-focused. So it's about me and what I get out of it, and how am I going to cope with the in-laws or the grandparents or the children or the dog or Aunt Ethel or the socks, and it's all about or what am I going to get? How am I going to enjoy myself? What am I going to watch on television? But it can also be self-focused in a broader sense, on us focused. And that doesn't sound like self-focused, but what I mean is that it's focused on ourselves as human beings, as you said just now, that it becomes about us. It's not about a celebration of the incarnation of the Son of God actually becoming human, becoming one of us. It is just such an extraordinary transforming event in history, and we are so wrapped up with ourselves at Christmas because of all of this extra stuff that we've added in, because of the way that the celebration has become so commercialized and all the rest of it. It is hard for us to keep the right focus.
There's an element of self-indulgence in that as well, isn't there? If we let the focus settle onto humanity, and maybe that's the way, because an awful lot of people are very generous at Christmas. I mean, there is an underpinning idea that Christmas is a time of generosity and kindness of spirit and so on, and the vast majority of people probably pick that up. But it is that sense that the self-indulgence where it becomes about humanity and it becomes about our family and it becomes about our kindness, and I suppose it excludes the reality, the message of Jesus in that. We exclude him in that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And most of us who are Christians recognize that we do this. We have moments during the Advent and Christmas period where we reflect more on what the incarnation really means, and we lament the fact that we are caught up with preparing for the festivities rather than preparing to reflect on Christ. And so, most of us have that tension. We live with that dilemma. But we are as guilty of self-indulgence as, maybe not as guilty, but we are guilty of self-indulgence in the same way as many of the people around us who are not claiming to celebrate the true story of Christmas at all. And you made an interesting just comment along the way there about our kindness. We can be self-indulgent in our kindness because our very generosity can be meeting our needs. Because we can feel good about ourselves, that we are being kind and generous, and we're supplying all of this great bounty at our table. Welcome to our table, aren't we wonderful people? So yeah, we can be meeting our own needs at that level. I think one of the problems is that we too easily see Christmas, like all of the rest of life, in material terms. So we've mentioned once or twice in my discussions with you about the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, who's been working on quite a lot this year for my PhD research. And Taylor says that we live in what he calls the immanent frame. So the immanent is the here and the now and the physical. And we see, he says, that everybody in the Western world sees life essentially in those terms. Now that it may be closed, like living in a closed glass box, because in which case we don't recognize that there is any transcendent dimension. There is no God. There's nothing beyond it. It really is only the physical. But he says those who are believers, whether in the Christian believers or believers in Buddhism or anything else, but those people who do recognize a transcendent dimension, they live in an open immanent frame, but by which he means we're open to transcendence. There's no top on the box, but still, as we look around at the world around us, what we see is stuff at a physical level, and our default is to think about all of life at the immanent level, and not to be thinking about it as what is God doing and how is God involved in this. And he says that is such a radical transformation from 500 years ago, where it would be unthinkable to see the world in those kinds of terms, because God was involved in everything. But now we interpret all of our health issues in physical terms, our mental health issues in physical terms, our social issues in physical terms, natural disasters in physical terms, and growing in understanding of all these things at a physical level. Absolutely right. That's part of our scientific progress, which comes out of being made in the image of God. All of that is good, but it does mean it's very easy just to stop our thinking there and to not see that God is involved, not to recognize that there are powers of darkness at work in the world as well. And we do that to Christmas. So we don't see Christmas firstly in transcendent terms. This is God breaking in. We see Christmas firstly as this is a nice time, and it's also about Jesus.
So when we shift our focus then, and we take our focus from ourselves, we take our focus from humanity, we take our focus from the box, what difference does it make if we actively choose this year to put our focus for Christmas first and foremost on Christ and God breaking into the world, his light coming into the darkness?
Of course, this is difficulty then, isn't it? Because at one level, it might make no difference whatsoever in terms of what we do, because it's right that we celebrate. It's right that we're generous. It's right that we feast. It's okay to watch some television. God has given us good things to enjoy, and this is a time to enjoy them. There's no in principle problem with having a great celebration in the dark days of the year, especially after the kind of year that we've had. So at one level, it might not change very much, but the way we go about it surely has to change, doesn't it? The way I have to go about it. I need to do something to radically reorientate the way that I think about all that I'm doing, and not just to drift with the ordinary Christmas flow that's just been the pattern for year after year after year of Christmases. And just, there's there's certain expectations, the traditions are so established, not just the community traditions or the society-wide traditions, but the traditions of my family. And we had a little discussion with one of my sons on Zoom on Sunday, and say, "Oh, we might do something different for Christmas lunch this year." Kind of it's horror, you know.
Nobody likes turkey, but everybody wants it on Christmas Day.
And we wouldn't have this, but we need to do this. And okay, we have our own family traditions, but the way we do that, what for each thing, each element of Christmas, is this about me, or is this a way of celebrating the Lord's coming in some way? How does this preparation of this dish for Christmas lunch, because we always have
sprouts. Come on, we all have sprouts.
Sprouts, okay. We all have sprouts, but or red cabbage and apple is one of the favourites in our house that we're not allowed to do away with. So as we're preparing that dish, that actually is doing a number of different things. It is part of enabling the family or the however many people we have to feast well in order to celebrate, and that's good. Feasting has always been part of celebrating what God has done, but it's also a recognition, a gratitude for the good things that God has given us, which culminates in the coming of the Lord Jesus. But God has given us all these good things so we can celebrate them in themselves. But it's also an anticipation. All feasting looks ahead to the new creation, the coming of the Lord Jesus into our world, and then his dying and rising again, and his ascension back to heaven promises us the new creation. So our feasting now, celebrating the incarnation, is also anticipating the new creation. And Advent was always about. Advent is not about preparing for the first coming of Christ because he's come. Advent has always in church history, until relatively recently, been about reflecting on, remembering that with a view to reflecting on the second coming of the Lord Jesus and what he will be bringing in. And we've lost that. So how can my preparation of Christmas lunch be an anticipation of new creation?
And do you think there's an element here where, the core message of Christmas is the idea of the incarnation, that Jesus comes into the world, that God comes into the world and dwells with us. The divine becomes flesh. The connection of Jesus, of the Christ child, at the heart, at the core of life. Is that perhaps the key to what you're driving at, that when we grasp and remember and actively apply that sense to our preparation of Christmas, then it doesn't matter whether the festival or the element of it is overtly spiritual or whether it is perhaps a little more secular. If Christ is at the core of it, it becomes a place of worship.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. So part of it is, how do we get to that point? That's the challenge of all of our discipleship, isn't it? How do we in practice get Christ at the center of our day-to-day living? And that's not an easy question to answer, because we live in such a distracted world. Our technology distracts us, the news cycle distracts us, media distracts us, the frenetic nature of life distracts us, the pressures of COVID distract us, and human life has always had lots of distraction. It's not a new thing, but the nature and the intensity of distraction in the contemporary world is extraordinary. Alan Noble talks about this a lot in his book Disruptive Witness, and he says in there that we need to find ways of living. We need to find practices and disciplines, rituals even, that will enable us to fight the distraction. So we need to carve out time for quiet and reflection, for silence and solitude, and time to read God's word. And that all sounds like it's stating the obvious, but we don't do it very well. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why traditional carol services were powerful when they were done well, were powerful in a way that more contemporary ones are not always. And now I don't hear me as being anti-contemporary carol services. I'm not. We've done some great ones in my church, and I love them. But the contemporary modes of worship generally are often, again, generalization, they are often quite reflective of the time that we live in that they're quite full on and with high sound levels, and there's lots in them because that's the kind of culture we live in. Whereas more traditionally, I think there would be more scope for silence and reflection. Maybe it's because of the use of liturgy, where we keep liturgy. I mean, I'm from a pretty non-liturgical church. I'm from an independent evangelical church, where liturgy is not a big thing, and I think that's something missing really, because liturgy gives us those moments of quiet, of pause, of times of silence, and the more reflective carols, the more reflective songs and Christmas poetry and things, we need things to push us into a reflective space, and it's not all, we mustn't be all celebrating and rejoicing all the time, because we need to reflect on what this actually means. So what I'm saying is, are we going about this in a way that gives us the space to reflect, or are we just bombarding ourselves with more stuff, even more Christian stuff? I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think it does. I think finding the balance is important in that, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, I don't think any of us would want to remove the idea of gifts and feasting from the Christmas celebration, but we have to hold it in tension with that. Well, I suppose we have the idea of gifts. Obviously, I would say obviously, you might correct me because, who knows, I might be barking up the wrong tree here. But the idea of gifts, it comes from the Magi, it comes from the wise men bringing gifts to the baby, doesn't it? But the bringing of the gifts was focused on the child. Is that are those the traditions that we need to maybe enhance more?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right that's the origin of gift giving. There is an argument that it's also because of one of the stories, one of the legends probably, about Nicholas of Myra, the original St. Nicholas, Bishop of Smyrna, that he was such a good person and he gave gifts. I mean, the particular legend is that he couldn't get into this house to leave gifts for this poor family, so he threw them down the chimney, and that's why the stocking business is on the mantelpiece is put up. I mean, that is clearly legend, but he does seem to be somebody who was known for his generosity. So it may, there's probably a little bit of both of those going on in there. But why was he giving gifts in the first place? Because God has given the ultimate gift, and the Magi gave gifts to Jesus as a marking of who he is. But that's become corrupted.
Yeah, because that's the word that we try to avoid. Very often as Christians, we try to avoid saying that. But actually, that...
I'm sorry.
No, but I think you have a valid point, because we do try to avoid being the sort of wet blanket and so on. But actually, the way in which gift giving has become so commercialized, so now it has taken on this transactional thing that I buy you a gift and you are duty bound to buy a gift for me of equal value, and if you should buy me a gift of greater value than I have given you, what does that say about our relationship? And therefore, do I then need to think about what I give to you next Christmas and how I buy? And it suddenly becomes this thing of massive pressure, because it's driven by prime motivators, but it becomes this massive pressure rather than something that is out of a generous heart, and
Yes.
you've got to find that core for it to have a meaning that reflects the incarnation.
Yes, that's right. You do, and I think to say to keep, as we've already said, keeping in mind how this points to the incarnation and celebrates the incarnation is really key. Because if my gift giving is I am giving a gift because to whoever, because I love them and I value them, and in a sense, as I give them something, I need to be seen that as giving to. I think this makes sense. I need to see my gift giving to them as somehow reflecting my gift giving to the Lord. I'm grateful that the Lord has given that person to me in my life, and I reflect that gratitude to God's generosity in the giving of this person to me, in the same way that He ultimately gave His Son. I give the gift to them, which is kind of, I need to see that as ultimately a gift to God Himself. But of course, we mustn't neglect giving to the church more widely, and to the, perhaps particularly to the persecuted church, or to the the wider church, as a sense of more directly giving to the Lord, out of our gratitude for all that He's done. But our motivation needs to be the incarnation has changed everything, and out of the gratitude of my heart for the incarnation and for all of the good gifts that God has given us, that are entailments of that or follow on from that in some sense, then I will give, and I will be generous. Because I'm reflecting the heart of God at that point.
So when we think about Christmas, and we think about this period of time and all these messages, and I mean, I don't know, we haven't touched on the idea of the 25th of December, whether that, let alone trees and that sort of thing. But are there some of these things that we need to let go of, do you think? And feel free to visit the 25th of December and trees as we think about this.
Let's just mention the 25th of December since you brought that up. So one of the things that you hear quite a lot, especially from atheists, is that we only celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, because Christians, those terrible Christians, they took over this ancient pagan festival. Why do Christians always have to pinch ancient pagan festivals? So the Sol Invictus, the conquering of the sun over the depths of winter in the darkest time of the year, that's what we're celebrating. And then the Romans celebrated Saturnalia, and the Christians said, "Oh, look, here's a convenient little festival.
It's
we
a
can't
good
have
date.
these pagans celebrating. Let's take that, and we could celebrate Jesus." And that actually has no foundation whatsoever, because the earliest record of that being celebrated was in 273, if I remember correctly, and Christians have been celebrating Christmas at this time of year already for a couple of centuries by that point. So the question is, why do we celebrate on the 25th of December? And yes, there was something of a takeover in the sense that Western Europe became Christianized. And so those pagans who were celebrating midwinter festivals, and particularly in Northern Europe, to the with Yule logs and all these kinds of things, those people became Christians. And they found that they were celebrating midwinter and Christmas at the same time, and gradually some of the old traditions just kind of leached into the Christmas celebrations and got reinterpreted, or just held on. They just didn't drop them. But the pagan ideas dropped off, and they carried on celebrating Christmas. But it's just because the two were so close together. But Christians were already celebrating it earlier. So earlier than Saturnalia and Sol Invictus. So why 25th of December? It comes about because there was an old tradition that prophets, of which Jesus was one, of course, always died on the anniversary of either their birth or their conception. So he died at Passover, and I thought almost certainly 25th of March, thereabouts, and therefore 9 months. Oh, 25th of December. That's when Jesus must have been conceived. You think, oh, so it's not completely baseless, but almost certainly Jesus was born in the spring because the shepherds were out in the fields looking after the sheep. So lambing time. And of course the area around Bethlehem was the primary area for rearing sheep for the temple in Jerusalem. So the shepherds are actually out there looking after the Passover lambs.
That's a staggering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
That really is. That really is. And
Yeah.
the idea that the shepherds would come and that they would not only give worship, but also be enthused with excitement about God breaking into the world. So they proclaimed it to the world and his wife as they went back to their flocks. I mean, that just is I suspect I may well quote that in a Christmas sermon this year, because it is a fascinating thought. And what about the tree then? Because, we make much, don't we, about, is Christmas about the cross or is it about the tree? And we get the heart of that. It's obviously about the cross. But what about the tree? I mean, should we have these Christmas trees as part of our Christmas celebration?
Well, I know somebody who argued very strongly that they should not have a Christmas tree because these were pagan. And so they had if I remember rightly, they had a big igloo instead. Which feels to be slightly inconsistent. Not that igloos are pagan, but I mean, how is that any more Christian?
Yes, yeah.
because what has snow got to do with Christmas, especially if Jesus was born in the spring? So in the bleak winter, lovely lines and all that. There's a great verse in that. There's some great lines in that carol, but it's not bleak midwinter, and the snow hadn't fallen, snow on snow. But now the tree, yes, early Reformation or late medieval origins, probably. There's two main contenders, and it could have origins in both of these. One is that a monk whose name has gone from my head, St. Boniface, went to Latvia and brought the gospel to Latvia. And in trying to communicate about the Trinity, he used the image of the basically triangular shape of a fir tree to talk about the Trinity. So the early Latvian Christians, according to Latvian legend, really, or tradition, started celebrating the fir tree as God's tree because it represented the Trinity. So they would hang it in their homes at Christmas to remind them of the Trinity. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that in the medieval mystery plays, there was often a paradise tree representing the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And that was sometimes brought into homes at Christmas as a way of remembering that, but also decorated with apples to remind people of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because of course in Eden is where it all went wrong, and that's what precipitated the need for the incarnation. So there's that tradition, and then there was the idea in I think early Reformation times in the German sort of states of a triangular shelf. So not a flat triangle, but I think a three-dimensional, flat bottom with a triangular top that would be put out at Christmas with effectively a nativity scene on it with Christmas figures. And that was then combined with one of these other traditions. So let's take these Christmas figures and put them on basically a triangular tree, as a way of reminding us of incarnation. So if those are, I think I said two, those were actually three possible origins for trees coming into the home, all with Christian traditions. It almost certainly isn't to do with the bringing of a Yule log in, because that's a separate tradition. The Christmas tree and the Yule log, which does have pagan origins, those seem to be distinct traditions, but because it's evergreen stuff coming in, it's easy to see how they merged.
And it's important then, isn't it? And we need to draw to a close our musings on this, but it is important for us to have our facts right. It is important for us to have our understanding right. But going right back to what we said at the beginning, it is important for us to have the message of this time right. And whatever we're going to enjoy with Christmas, we need to be clear that the message is accurate and true.
Yeah, absolutely. The message has got to be right at the center. And we easily talk about incarnation, but what does it really mean that God himself, the Son of God, one of the Trinity, the Son of God, becomes human and remains human. He could not represent us before God as if he only took on the form of humanity, but he is one of us. He dies the perfect sacrifice as one of us, but also as God himself. He takes the punishment that we deserve on himself. He takes the separation that we deserve on himself. He takes the wrath on himself. He does it willingly. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit, from before creation, unitedly planned this rescue mission of humanity. And God breaks into our world. He doesn't just manifest in our world, but he becomes one of us to mix with the ordinary people, the low life, and the wealthy, and the influential, and the non-influential, and the lame, and the weak, and the excluded, the marginalized, the women, the Samaritans, the lepers. He mixes with the whole jolly lot of us, the good ones and the bad ones. He is one of us. He's tempted in every way, just as we are, genuinely tempted, yet entirely without sin, so that he makes the perfect sacrifice at Easter. We cannot separate Christmas and Easter. And we need to reflect much more on what incarnation really means for us and why it matters, and why it still matters that there is a man at the right hand of the Father in heaven interceding for us, saying, Jane and I are reading Dane Ortland's brilliant book, Gentle and Lowly, at the moment, about the heart of Christ. And a wonderful couple of chapters, it's all wonderful, but a particularly brilliant couple of chapters about Christ as the man interceding for us before the Father, who wants the Son to intercede for us. He longs to hear. But Jesus saying to the Father constantly, I know what it's like to be tempted like they are, but I have paid the price for them. And that's what Christmas is all about. And we're looking ahead, as we said earlier. Our feast anticipates the new creation that he's bringing, where there will be the marriage feast of Christ and his bride, the church. Oh,
wonderful stuff. And you can find out more of Tony's thoughts on this and indeed a whole host of other things by having a look at his website, tonywatkins.co.uk. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining us to reflect on Christmas this year. Thank you, Tony.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond, and though it's been said many times, many ways, this year, genuinely, let's put our focus on the reality that makes it Merry Christmas to everyone. Good night.